Good morning and welcome everyone to this special conference for Albert Einstein University. It's an honor for us to have the presence of Dr. Claudia Mitchell with the conference called "This is How I See It, Studying Social Change with Young People." We're going to start with the words of our Chancellor, Dr. Álvaro Guerra.
Welcome everyone. Today, we will have at Albert Einstein University, Mexico, a lecture by Professor Claudia Mitchell, distinguished James McGill Professor in the Faculty of Education of McGill University in Canada. She is the winner of the 2022 José Vasconcelos World Award of Education of the World Cultural Council. The World Cultural Council is an international organization founded in 1981. The members of the council are eminent global scientists and personalities and include numerous Nobel laureates. The objectives of the WWCC are to promote scholarship, art, and culture while fostering fraternity among people, nations, and governments based on mutual respect for ideology, religion, race, and gender. One of the means of achieving these objectives is by granting the Albert Einstein World Award of Science, the José Vasconcelos World Award of Education, and the Leonardo da Vinci World Award of Arts to outstanding individuals or organizations whose work has had a significant and positive impact on the cultural enrichment of humankind. Albert Einstein Award of Science is granted to reward remarkable scientists who serve as role models and whose work brings progress to mankind. José Vasconcelos Award of Education is granted to recognize educators whose contributions have had a significant influence of the advancement of the scope of culture. Arts is granted to promote art in all its expressions and to reward those artists whose work is most deserving of world recognition. In rewarding outstanding individuals, the World Cultural Council pays tribute to their remarkable achievements and as well as their relentless persistence. Their hard-earned breakthroughs in the fields of knowledge, learning, and creativity have rendered an invaluable service to mankind. The nomination for these awards are coming from rectors of top universities worldwide. The winners are selected by an interdisciplinary committee integrated by 124 distinguished personalities from the 5 continents, coordinated by the Nobel Prize Sir Fraser Studdart, President of the World Cultural Council. The World Cultural Council annually organizes an awards ceremony at which these recognitions are conferred. Each ceremony is held in a different country with a renowned acting as a host. Some of these are United States, University Institute of Technology, Sweden, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, University of Oxford, United Kingdom, UNESCO, France, the National Research Council, Canada, Australian National University, City University of Hong Kong, China, University of Tsukuba, Japan, Witwatersrand University, South Africa, Institute. This year, the award ceremony will be on November 13, and the host is University of Coimbra, Portugal. The winner of the 2022 Albert Einstein World Award of Science is Professor Victoria Caspi. The prize is awarded in recognition of her fundamental contributions to our understanding of the most extreme forms of stars known in our universe, the magnetars. Neutron stars having the highest magnetic fields known in the universe. Architect Jean Jun has been selected as the winner of the 2022 Leonardo da Vinci World Award of Arts. The World Cultural Council recognized Jun as an extraordinary leader in design practice and research, particularly for her commitment to social justice and equity, environmental sustainability, and technological innovation deployed for the betterment of society. The 2022 José Vasconcelos World Award of Education will be granted to Professor Claudia Mitchell. The prize is awarded for her life commitment to education as an inspiring teacher and passionate advocate for youth, especially transforming lives of thousands of young people from marginalized backgrounds. Before to listen the lecture by Professor Mitchell, Omar Alcalá, Chief of our International Affairs of Albert Einstein University, will tell us more about her academic contributions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guerra. As you said before, Claudia Mitchell is a distinguished James McGill Professor in the Faculty of Education, McGill University, and an honorary professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. At McGill, she's the director of the Institute for Human Development and Well-Being, and the founder and director of the Participatory Cultures Lab, a research and training unit in the Faculty of Education funded through the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. Her research focuses on participatory visual and arts-based approaches to working with young people and communities in relation to addressing critical social issues, such as gender equality and gender-based violence, and in a wide range of country contexts in West Africa, Southern and Eastern Africa, and East Asia Pacific. She's a founder and editor-in-chief of the journal Girlhood Studies, an interdisciplinary journal. She has received numerous awards for her research, including the 2016 Gold Medal for the impact of her work with young people, the Léon Guérin Prix du Québec in 2019, and the José Vasconcelos World Education Award in 2022. She's a fellow of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and a member of the Royal Society of Canada. Dr. Mitchell, welcome to Albert Einstein University.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Guerra, for your lovely introduction to the whole World Culture Education Awards. And Omar, thank you very much for your generous comments this morning. I am really honored to be with you this morning at the Albert Einstein University. And I am extremely excited that you are excited about the work around gender and gender-based violence and gender equity as ways of thinking about how we work with young people. For almost, well, several decades, I guess my work has been very much around around gender equality. I work in a faculty of education, so of course I also work with many pre-service teachers and people doing research in this area. And we know it's an important area in the world. We've seen across so many countries the really devastating impact of gender-based violence on girls and young women. And we saw, particularly during COVID-19, the number of schools that were closed down, the increases in intimate partner violence in homes, increased teen pregnancy, forced and early marriage. So although these have been areas that I've worked on for a long time, I think in the last 2.5 years, we have seen such an increase in why this work is so important and why it's so important that we engage girls and young women and boys and young men in this work. I call my talk How We See It. It's sort of a broad category that I use for talking about the ways in which visual research is so important to doing this. So I call it How We See It, meaning how do we young people see it, how young people that I work with see it. And really the idea of what can we learn when we study social change with young people and through their eyes, and how might those of us who are in policy-making positions or positions of making change, how we can work alongside young people. In the talk today, I'm going to refer to work in several different countries. I'm going to talk about Sierra Leone, Mozambique, South Africa, India. In Canada, I will refer to some of the work that I've been doing with our team with Indigenous girls and young women. And I hope to make a reference to some work that one of my doctoral students did in Mexico as well. So to just think about the range of work where young people's voices have been so critical, and how we've been working with international NGOs. I'm just going to put up the PowerPoint presentation now, and I will try to keep an eye on time so that we also have some time for questions at the end. So I'm just going to start into, this is just the title page or the title slide, and a photograph of a young woman from Ethiopia who was, I think, shows this wonderful reflection of taking a picture in a glass and sort of the ways in which the images speak back to the issues that she's looking at. So my first slide is actually about gender transformation. I put this slide up as maybe a way to frame the kind of work that I've been looking at through the eyes of young people. I think there are many scholars working in the area of gender transformation and looking at gender transformative approaches to understanding social change and how we disrupt gender norms. How do we not just look at Band-Aid solutions to issues of gender equity and gender equality, but how do we create lasting change? And I've just put up a few of the principles that, again, a number of different scholars have worked on. I've just added to this, but really the commitment to a participatory agenda where the voices of girls and women are heard. That is absolutely crucial. That boys and men can be allies and champions of change. How do we build in intergenerationality? How do we think of personal transformation? That this is not just the youth that we work with, but for everyone who's working in this area, unless we can see transformation in our own lives, or perhaps the notion of personal transformation becomes the challenge that we think about. We also think of this work as very reflexive. What could gender transformative success look like? And constantly asking the question, how are we doing? It's not something that happens overnight. We know that to change the types of gender norms that have produced the very difficult situations for so many people is something that will take time. And so we need to keep checking in. How are we doing? Where are we going? And recognizing the challenges and being prepared for potential unplanned consequences. There are perhaps more there are other principles we could think about in terms of gender transformation, but those are really critical ones, I think, in terms of framing the work with young people and framing the projects that I'm going to be talking about this morning. We are just trying to move the screen. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to start with a question. And it's a question that I've used in several research projects. And I guess it's something that guides this notion of working with young people. Anne Oakley, a sociologist from the UK in 1994 wrote, "What would it really mean to study the world of young people, both as knowers and as actors?" And I think that's the critical feature, knowers and actors, that is so important to this work. We see this in the climate change movement, climate justice, the work being led by Greta Thunberg and others. We saw it in girls' education and Malala, knowers and actors. At the climate talks in Egypt right now, we're seeing the presence of young people as knowers and actors, as being on center stage. And of course, in Iran right now, we're looking at the ways in which many young people are making very daring and very brave and courageous interventions as knowers and as actors to have an impact on the world around them in relation to gender and gender-based violence and gender equity. So the question, what would it really mean to study the world of young people, both as knowers and actors, is something that I think we can use as a way to drive what we do and to keep coming back to these terms, knowers and as actors. I'm going to have many different answers, I guess, to this question. What would it really mean to study the world of young people, both as knowers and actors? But I'm going to turn it over to 16-year-old Matthew Johannes, a young man from Atlantis in a township just outside of Cape Town. And this is what he says about the world.
I think one of the biggest challenges as this whole thing about your sexuality, who you are, when am I ready for sex? Should I do it? Shouldn't I? They thrown like the whole subject of sex like in our face and how we have to deal with it. And in between that, we still have to find out who we are too. So it's like kind of complicated. This complicates life.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest.
So it does kind of complicate life. What would it really look like? It would be very complicated. And of course, that is why those of us who work in the social sciences and work in areas of social change, we know this work is complicated. And Matthew, I think, says it so beautifully in relation to sexual and reproductive health rights as a critical feature of gender equity and understanding many aspects of gender identity. I've just put a little diagram on the screen that several of my colleagues at McGill and I, Dr. Lisa Starr and Dr. Jennifer Thompson and I, sort of came up as a way to kind of maybe show this idea of the significance of the tools of trying to get at these very complicated issues of seeing through the eyes of young people, and where that links in relation to understanding, and ultimately where does that link in terms of social change. If you go to the bottom of the screen, you will see appropriately from the ground up participatory tools. And these are really ways of, tools such as cell filming or participatory video, photo voice, digital storytelling, theater and role play, drawing, ways to get at the voices of young people, and really starting with their perspectives and starting with their constructions of what change might look like, and engaging in the next level of understanding through dialogue, through multiple perspectives, through reflection, through shared meaning making, through exhibitions, through screenings, through community forum events. How do we get at that understanding? And then thinking right up there at the top, social change as something that we look at, and we think about, how do we inform policy? How does the work from the ground up inform policy? How does it contribute to changing norms and attitudes? How does it contribute to changing practices, everyday practices? So hang on to this idea. We've been working on so many aspects of this from the ground up participatory work, but I think this diagram perhaps helps think through what the intricate and complicated work might look like. I'm going to start in terms of the tools to kind of focus on something called cell filming for the next little while. This is a participatory visual methodology that we did not invent in the Participatory Cultures Lab of McGill, but certainly since 2010, 2011, so many people have been working in this area. The term itself, cell filming, comes from my colleagues at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Jonathan Dockney and Kayan Tomaselli, who very, I think, adroitly realized that the cell phone itself and mobile technology provides such an important vehicle for social change. It can also be a vehicle that can be, perhaps it may have negative consequences as well. So we try to think about it as how can cell filming be part of constructing and being a from the ground up methodology. What's a cell film is something that some people might ask. And so we have a very simple definition. Cell films are short videos. They're typically 30 to 90 seconds, although they can be longer. And we know that some filmmakers have shot an entire feature-length film on a cell phone. They're shot entirely on a cell phone or other devices, sometimes an iPad or a tablet, and they are about conveying a social message or addressing a social issue. And they align very nicely with work such as digital storytelling and photo voice, seeing through the eyes of the producer, typically done in participatory ways in small groups. So there's a lot of discussion, and typically right through to a final stage of reflection. So we've actually mapped it out here. Anyone who is interested in more details, I will say at the very end a little bit more about our annual Cell Film Festival and some of the books that people have written. But it's always about visual ethics as a very critical part of this. People doing research in the area of the visual and human rights must first start with the human rights of people who are in the cell films, brainstorming, coming at ideas. What are, why do young women get pregnant? This might seem like a very obvious question, but thinking through what are the issues that you would want to develop in there? Storyboarding, planning out what does the 30 to 90 second video cell film actually look like? The filming of it, the screening of it. And then finally, the reflection process. These are all areas that can be repeated over and over again. I will be referring to a project in Sierra Leone where we spent 4 days making many cell films so that the participants themselves could start seeing how they could adjust and adapt the methodologies, and how they could fine tune so many technical features such as sound and light and all of the technical and cinematic pieces, as well as the storylines themselves. We're going to look at 2 cell films right now, and both of them are in the genre of media messages. There are many different storylines and melodramas and using cue cards or investigative journalism. There are many different genres that participants have chosen in their work around sexual and reproductive health rights or around gender equity more broadly. But this is I'm going to show you the first cell film actually comes from Mozambique. It's in Portuguese with English subtitles, and it was part of a project where beginning teachers, pre-service teachers, and teacher educators had formed gender clubs at the teachers' colleges, and they were really looking at how can they create messages that they could use at the colleges that would be a form of consciousness raising with their peers to talk about the various forms of gender-based violence, ranging from intimate partner violence through to, as you will see in this one, something about sex for grades and the idea that instructors themselves have to take responsibility. It's very short. It's 23 seconds long, so don't miss it. Here we go.
Colega, ei, colega, estou feliz. Consegui aquela minha aluna da turma E. Aquela Clarinha. Aquela é minha.
Parabéns, colega, de ouvir a vossa conversa. Assédio sexual nas escolas é um crime. Não. 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 Não.
Colega, ei, colega, estou feliz.
No. Okay, so that just gives you that was one that this group of 4 young men, I think they just kind of really took over the workshop when they presented this, and actually people realized that know how powerful it was. And it's very interesting. I showed it recently in Sierra Leone, and it was that the power of the language and the power of thinking how men and boys can be so central to this process, and that being a really critical part of this. The second cell film that I'm going to show comes from Sierra Leone, and it was made 2 weeks ago when my 2 colleagues and I were conducting the 4-day workshop. This one is on early marriage. And what we started out with in each one of these is people actually doing a little bit of research on what the issues are. So this was something that one team came up with in terms of statistics, that the percentage of women aged 12 to 24 who are married by the age of 15, and really thinking through like how difficult that is, and how do we think about what messages can we send out that would disrupt that. So here's the this one is a little more than 23 seconds, but not much.
Greetings, Mama Haja.
Good morning.
I am here to be the right bride of your daughter, be my 5th wife.
No, she's too young.
What?
Yes, I'm too young.
She's too young.
She's too young. I am too young.
She's too young.
Yes, she's too young.
Say no to early marriage.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So again, a very powerful message, and very. It had lots of practices. It's a 40 seconds. It took an afternoon to make that, but they did it over and over again as well to kind of think through how could they actually how could they make the tightest message they could and the most powerful message they could. And when it was screened to the entire group of 50 some people, teacher educators and pre-service teachers, it was the one that people all agreed on that totally took the idea of a message and really conveyed that, and it really led to a lot of discussion afterwards, which is the key part of this, the reflexive process. The making of cell films, or the making of using photo voice, or the making of doing work with clay, elicitation, any of these processes are about the discussion and the reflection. So in the immediate stages of after people produce these, we usually ask people to, what do they like best about their own cell film? What would they change or do differently? What was the reaction to the others? Because these are always done in small groups. So in our group of 50 people 2 weeks ago, at any one time, we had like 13 cell films that were being screened, all in similar topics or related to sexual and reproductive health rights in some way. We always ask people, if you're going to do your cell film over again, what would you do differently? And of course, making that, giving people the opportunity to do it over again, because just taking those technical pieces and getting it right. But I guess the most important one going forward in terms of social change is, who else should see these cell films and how can they see them? So people come to the idea of thinking about audience and what impact could their work have on audience. And not all cell films are meant for all people. Who should see the particular one about I'm too young, she's too young? And how would you get the messages out there? So a lot of discussion about, well, how would we show them in a village? How would we show them to our parents? How would we show them to our teachers? And in many areas where there's limited access to the internet or to cell phone coverage, what else can people do? How would they do this? So it's a big question. It's not just, oh, we made a cell film and now we go on. So we made a cell film and what are we going to do with it? But I want to actually talk about maybe some other parts of the process. When I mentioned if you were going to do something over again, what would you do differently? I actually want to talk about the notion of speaking back, which comes from the work of bell hooks and others, of talking back, speaking back. How do we actually think of the cell films as a way to disrupt in some ways? In a project that I worked on with a group of teachers in South Africa, they were very concerned about youth sexuality, and they were producing cell films that were really speaking back in a way to the high rates of HIV. This would be in around 2006 and 2007. And one of the things that they produced, they produced cell films that were very much about abstinence and be faithful and condomize, and young people shouldn't be having sex anyway. And when they showed them to each other, there was like sort of, I think just the murmurs of concern, where people saying, yes, but if we show these videos, these cell films are very moralistic. And we actually, in our group, we had worked with young people the year before on a photo voice project where they took pictures of stigma. And the one that you see before you was a photo voice project where the caption said, he could not accept that he is HIV positive. He decided to be female to silence her because the girl is willing to reveal their HIV status. And so we started having these discussions and dialogue. What difference will the videos, the cell films that you have produced make in relation to that situation? Will the videos that you've produced actually change things, or will it reproduce the kinds of norms that are making it very difficult for young people to have access to condoms, have access to any type of birth control? The teachers talked a lot about this. They kept looking back and forth at these photographs, and they eventually made new cell films that were much less moralistic, and they were much more about, well, how do we actually listen to young people, and maybe even listen to our own sons and daughters? And maybe that's where we start. I bring this up because I think it's very important to kind of consider this dialogue and the reflection and the speaking back, and that we don't just produce something, but it's also part of this process of thinking it through. And in this case, very much informed by young people. The pictures that the young people produced informed what the teachers did, which I think is another aspect of how this work can be so powerful in terms of young people's voices. I promised you that there would be a link to Mexico. This is a scenario, a set of scenarios from Union. I will not say this correctly, but it's on the screen. Joshua Schwab Cartaz, one of my doctoral students who graduated a couple of years ago and now is teaching at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, was very interested in language revitalization and the links between young people and elders in the community. And so his doctoral project was to carry out cell film production with elders and young people and thinking about the preservation of culture as well as the preservation of language. So this particular scenario comes out of Lionel Nisa, who's an elder in this community, who's showing youth how he extracts sand from the riverbeds to build the houses in the community, and as a traditional practice, how important that is for them to learn something about. They also, I think there were also several cell films around cooking, and again, kind of this appreciation of tradition and an appreciation of what does that mean in terms of how do we hang on to language, or how do we look at language revitalization. Josh makes this comment, which I put at the top. He says, cell filming helps demystify the process of research and personalizes it for students. I believe that some of the best work people do is when they have a personal connection. And I think that really comes back to the notion of transformation. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the personal connection in this work, and why it's so important. Josh has actually gone on to co-edit a book called What's a Cell Film? So if you see his name there and want to check that out, he co-edited the book with Casey Burkholder and Katie McEntee, but really thinking through this notion of preservation. I just put on one slide that actually isn't from cell filming, but that is from Photo Voice, just to give you a sense that this was a project in South Africa, but it involved people from Ethiopia, Botswana, and Kenya. And it was a very interesting one because people were looking at gender and leadership in institutions. And so it kind of gives you a sense of that whole process, which is rather hard to show. It's very easy when you're there, but if you can just look at the range of things where people are talking, they're creating slides, they're posting things. They all made small posters called I'm a Leader Because, and each person had their own photograph taken. But my very favorite part of this slide is on the extreme right side, where people are, you can see pictures all over a floor. And I don't know if any of you have thought through how to do thematic analysis of visual data, but this is how the team did it. We had made enlarged copies of all the photographs they'd produced, and people were like moving them around and talking about, no, this means this is about leadership. No, I think this is about something else. And the discussions about the pictures were very embodied, I would say, because people could actually manipulate and move the pictures. And that's really, again, part of this reflection and thinking through where do we go from here? And in this case, around gender and leadership. So those are like some of the things that happen in workshops, and the pedagogy of the workshop is indeed a piece of facilitation that is very important. And maybe to go back to Joshua Schwab Cartaz, he has also co-edited a book on facilitation of visual research, and it's something that many of us have been working on in the workshop. But I'm also very interested in what we call beyond the workshop. What happens after a group of people spend 3 days together, 4 days together, 1 day together, making cell films? What happens next? What is this? How can this be more than just the workshop? So I'm just going to show a couple of examples of what I call beyond the workshop. This is from a project called Networks for Change and Wellbeing that involved Indigenous young women in Canada and rural Black young women in rural areas of South Africa. And this is an example of what happens after the workshop. In Patterson, the participants all have their cell films on their cell phones. So when they leave the workshop, they do not require the researchers or the facilitators to be providing technology for how to circulate these. The participants themselves, with the small screen, which is really what cell films are about, fit for the small screen, they were able to show their cell films wherever they wanted. And this is one young woman says, the reason why our cell film rape is real is my favorite, is because I noticed that in my community, people pretend to not want to believe that rape is real. My other favorite pieces are Rape is Real action brief, because as a group, we managed to come up with solutions that we think might help in a rape incident. And what they did, she goes on to talk about, I showed it to my mother. And she said, I had no idea you knew about how to report rape. I didn't know that when I was your age. She also showed it to many of her neighbors who would watch this 1-minute video, cell film, and talk about how important it is that young people know this. They also talked about who else should see their cell films. So they talked about how they wanted police officers to see them because they're the people that we report the cases to. So since we made a film about how to report rape, we want we want the police to see that we know this and that they will be able to act on it. Or we want to see how the clinic and the police staff can work together. After a girl is being raped, she goes to the clinic to test and the police station to report. So it's very important that all of these stakeholders understand what we know. And then of course, they also talked about other politicians and ways of doing this. And I think that notion of the ownership of being able to be able to use your own words and your own productions in this one-on-one idea. I mean, not that we could never have like group showings, but the idea that we could actually meet up with a person and say, hey, do you want to see this, my cell film on this, and have a discussion about it. The group that we worked with in Sierra Leone a couple of weeks ago, we spent the last morning of the workshop talking about taking action and action plans and what are people going to do after the workshop. And it's very interesting, this group of pre-service teachers went home, they traveled back to their community on Sunday. By Monday, they were already circulating a cell film on WhatsApp that was about stopping female genital mutilation. And it's interesting, it came up several times in the workshop, but we didn't actually get around to doing one. So I put this out here because it actually shows you their storyboard. This group of, I think there's about 10 or 12 young women in a dorm. The three who were at the workshop who were from that community, went back and on Monday said, we're going to show you some cell films that we made, and then we're going to make another one. And this is the process. We are going to do some brainstorming. So you'll see up in the top right-hand corner, problems of female genital mutilation, and they followed the instructions exactly as we had done them in the workshops. You need to brainstorm, you need to talk about these issues first before you start filming. Then they created you'll see on the extreme left-hand side, their storyboard. They plotted out, they planned out each of the scenes, and you'll see that they had their credits at the end. I'm not going to show this right now simply because it's in a Creole dialect and we haven't had a chance to put the actual English subtitles, but I think the idea that people leave a workshop and they take what they understand, they take what they can do, and they move it to another level. And it was circulating to the entire team of all 50 people who were at the workshop. Up until Sunday, we're able to see this media message cell film on Monday. And that idea of how that just reaches people, and people are talking about this, and people are thinking about, well, how does this storyline work? Is there a different storyline? So that happens after the workshop. I just want to show you I guess a transmedia notion, because people make cell films and they do other things. In these slides on the extreme left is from Eskasoni, a Mi'kmaq community in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. This is an Indigenous, the largest Indigenous community in Atlantic Canada. The youth who worked on cell films and worked on gender-based violence decided they wanted to create something that was more permanent. And they have developed a memorial garden dedicated to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, of whom there are many. And this is one of the early stages of their garden. The youth designed it. They worked with other facilitators. They worked with the Band Council to create this. And they're now, the idea of how do they maintain it? How is it a sacred space, a spiritual space, but also a remembering space I think of Remembrance and Tolerance, your amazing museum in Mexico City, remembering and tolerance, memory and tolerance. On the right-hand side is a slide from Treaty 6, which is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It's a home of the Métis. And the girls who had been involved in making cell films, and one of their cell films was an award-winning film, writing books, creating many other productions, also designed a mural. And it's always hard to show a mural, but if you look at the bottom, you'll see some buildings in the background. This is on Broadway Street in the middle of Saskatoon, and their mural is called Creator Save the Matriarch. And you've got an example of it up on the wall. There's also a video, if anyone is interested and would like to follow up, there's a 12-minute video on the making of this mural, which also led to a community event, so that the mural is there. Anybody who walks by it on the street can look at it. But on the day that it was launched, or there was a huge ceremony. Many community members came, they danced, they talked, they presented star blankets to the girls who developed it. So it goes way beyond, excuse me, it goes way beyond the cell film workshop. Declarations, manifestos. The girls who were in Networks for Change and Wellbeing from Canada and South Africa came together for a conference in 2018. And they did a girl festo, which is a type of, they didn't want to call it a manifesto, because they said, no, we are girls, we want to call it a girl festo. But it really mapped out what they saw as being the critical issues about how they want freedom, not just safety, and they want to end gender-based violence. So what they saw as being the issues, what they saw that they could do, what they wanted the adults around them to do, and what they saw as being a way forward. This Girl Festo has now been translated into 15 languages or more, including, I think, Spanish and Portuguese. It is also in a number of Indigenous languages, in French, Russian. There were girls from Russia at this event as well. But really that idea that you can reach people in many different ways. And one of their recommendations was that we should be involving more boys and young men, which has actually led to new projects with boys and young men. But it came from the girls. It's led by the girls. Well, I'm just winding down here. Those are some of the things that happen, I think, as a result of and after the workshop. And we could look at many more examples, but I think you get a sense of that. But the question people always ask is, well, does anything change? What difference does this make? If you'll remember back to the diagram at the bottom, what we had participatory from the ground up methodologies. We had in the middle, we had process, we had dialogue, we had different perspectives, we had reflection. But at the top, we had social change. Does anything change? So I'll just have a couple of examples, and I will refer you to a journal that Relebohili Moletsani and I guest edited last year for Agenda, which is a feminist journal from South Africa, where we did an entire issue called Girl-Led from the Ground Up Approaches to Policy Dialogue and Policy Change. So there's about 15 articles in there talking about how different kinds of girl-led and young women-led initiatives have contributed to policy change and policy dialogue, and what are some of the challenges going forward. So I would recommend that. But in the meantime, I'll also give you a couple of examples. The first one really goes, it's an example from South Africa where we had groups working in 4 or 5 different communities. You saw the Rape is Real piece, which was in Patterson, but there was another group called the Social Ills Fighters from Loskop, which is a community just at the edge of the Drakensberg Mountains in KwaZulu-Natal. When they first came together to talk about what issues were of most concern to them around gender, the single most important issue was forced and early marriage. I remember seeing some collages that they produced called Vows for Cows, that the families were marrying off their daughters for economic reasons. And they at the top, you'll see a story that reenacts girls being abducted for marriage. The girls made this cell film. Once they'd made it, they started screening it all over the place. And so if you look on the right-hand side, this is just an example of where they would have community events where they would show their cell film and they would have people talking about it. On the bottom screen, you'll see a typical example of a community forum where adults came together to watch the video, to watch the cell film, to hear the girls talking about this. I have to say, it took a long time. The girls made the cell film in 2016. In 2020, on March the 12th, the Loskop Protocol on First and Early Marriage was passed through the legislature, the provincial legislature in KwaZulu-Natal. And it came out of those people at the bottom, the adults, the teachers, the principals, parents, the chief of the band, taking the girls' ideas forward to the legislature. The girls themselves did not. They showed their cell film, they engaged in a lot of discussion, but at a certain point, adults have to kick in on this as well. And that's where the adults brought forward the notion of a protocol on how to prevent families from marrying off their daughters. A very clear example of policy change. It's written up in the IDRC website, and I think I had it on here, but I think I lost it. If you want to read more about this, if you just go to Forced and Early Marriage IDRC, you will find the full write-up of this story. So things came out of that cell film. I worked on a project in India in 2019, where young people came together to learn how to make cell films and do photo voice around sexual and reproductive health rights. The end of their project coincided with the beginning of COVID. And so we didn't know what they would be doing after the workshop. But one thing that did happen in the workshop is that everyone was given a cell phone to keep as part of their work. This was also funded by IDRC and Oxfam of Canada, and it proved or demonstrated so clearly what you could do with a cell phone if you had your own and you had some training and you wanted to engage the community in discussions. So I just have a couple of quotes where people talk about how, the community were very suspicious, and then they started becoming involved in looking at the cell films and the photos and talking about this work. Menstrual hygiene management was a very big one. And girls were missing many days of school because of their periods. And there was such a recognition in the cell films that were produced about menstrual hygiene management and showing them in these communities that adults and peers were beginning to realize what an important in terms of equity, why this is such an important issue. So this youth-led activism was long after the workshop, and we only had a chance to meet up with the youth at the end of the COVID restrictions to find out what they had been doing. One or two final pieces, thinking about how one group mentors another group. We've been looking at this notion of generation 1, generation 2, Gen 1, Gen 2, and these are in Treaty 6. The girls who were first part of the project in 2015 and 16 are now mentoring younger girls. Similarly, in Rankin Inlet, in one of the most northern community in Nunavut, in the top right-hand side, a group of older girls have been, again, generation 1 are now mentoring generation 2. Girls leading change and young girls leading change in the peace in South Africa. So this work goes on. The idea of there is change just within families, within communities, because of this type of engagement. And then I want to end with an example that comes out of a project that I started in 2002 with young people around HIV and AIDS. You met Matthew, who says life is complicated. Matthew was part of this project, and he was 16 years old in 2002, 2003. I have had the good fortune to work with a colleague, Shannon Walsh from the University of British Columbia, and Mandla Oliphant from Cape Town. And through a range of circumstances, we've managed to continue to work with these youth for 18 years. And so we are now launching a book on December the 2nd in Salt River in Cape Town called In My Life. And it's really, it brings the testimonials and the transcripts from young people of what they said in 2002 and 2003. Life is complicated, or Lindika says, this is a true story and I am the narrator of that story. She wrote in a book of poetry, right through to meeting up with them. We're still meeting up with them online, but the picture that you see in the middle is from 2019, where we had a meeting in Simonstown where we brought all of the youth who are now adults in their 30s together to talk about what difference does this work make to them? What do they want to do? And Lindike, who says, we have her quote at the beginning, and you can see her behind the camera in that picture at the top. She says, we need a youth camp where we can have this group like we had, where we can fill them with this positivity, take them away from everything, fill them with ideas, give them hope for a bright future so that they can go back to their homes. They spread it to others, that they could share that drive to be something better in life. And so that idea of how do we think about this work as being passing the torch or some sort of a circular circles within circles type of work. I guess I will know more in a couple of weeks when I go to South Africa to the book launch and meet the participants who are all actually helping to plan the book launch, so that they're actually bringing in groups of young people from Love Life and several other organizations who do spoken word and who are doing new work around youth activism and sexuality education. And we're all going to be together. So that's kind of the final piece of this for me. I think that there are many aspects of, what does change look like? Where do we go from here? But I hope you can kind of see that this element of the from the ground up policy making and policy change and from the ground up methodologies and engagement of youth as being a really critical part of their being. Matthew, in a final piece that he quoted, said he says it definitely changes you, being empowered at such a young age. And he's reflecting on 18 years of his work as an activist. He doesn't work on HIV and AIDS right now. He works in a children's home. We volunteers, but he just talks about this idea of how do you give back, but also how do you learn anew from a new generation as well? And I think that is extremely hopeful when we think about gender transformation. So I'm ending there. I hope there will be time for a few questions, and maybe just on my ending, we have a South Film Festival McGill every year. So I've shown you a couple of media messages. That's what our theme is going to be this year. It's like, what's the message? If you had 1 minute to change the world, what would you say? I would be happy to send more information if anyone would like to submit. This is we have hash prizes and any language, but really I think that idea, if you had 1 minute to change the world, what would you say, is such a critical one. And we are actually quoting one of the participants from Sierra Leone who kind of said that at the end. Oh my goodness, this is such a responsibility. I only had 1 minute and I wanted to say something really important. I wanted to do something really important. And I think people have. So thank you very much. I'm going to take this down. It should be gracias. And I'm very happy if there's a few minutes, Omar, for questions or anything. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for this beautiful conference.
You're so welcome.
It was amazing. We need more people like you in the world. Dr. Mitchell, we want you to know that our university is your home.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, and now we have some questions from our students. So the first one is Luis, and the question is, how does Dr. Claudia Mitchell define personal transformation?
That's a great question. We've discussed this in different ways. I think it was in your own life. How, if we sort of think about our work as teachers or professors or whatever we do in the world, we try to bring out about change. But if we go home and we don't see any difference in our own lives, or how, what difference does it make that you are assisting other people to bring about social change if in your own home you maintain, or reproduce social norms that might be harmful, or that you don't actually really think through what do I do in my everyday life? Maybe it's around well-being, that we think of ourselves as part of this, and that we know that people perhaps can't bring about change if they are not well, or if their health is not well, or if their mental health is not well. So how do we take care of ourselves? So I think there are many different aspects of this personal transformation, but coming to this recognition of where this is in my own life, but also maybe that I feel I have some agency to do something more. We have a project with some young people in Mali around agency, and I think that again, these ideas are they're often very contested issues, but trying to get at that notion of how do I feel about this, and the statement that Joshua made in terms of the personal connections. Why am I doing this work? I'm doing it for other people, but I'm also doing it for my family, and I'm doing it in my community, and I'm looking at it in terms of my being as well. So I think it's that notion of how do we come to this? It's also a question that my colleagues and I are studying, that the 18 or 20 years with the youth who are now adults in South Africa, that notion of personal transformation is actually one of the questions that we want to follow up. And it's why longitudinal work is so important, why it's very important that we don't just run a workshop for a couple of days, and why it's so important that we can return to this, like that question of personal transformation. I think in about 4 months, I could say more, because we are following up this question in a very in terms of our interviews, but I thank you very much for the question. And I'd like actually for everyone maybe to think about, how would you define personal transformation? What would it be for you to transform your life, or transform some aspects of your life in terms of liberation, or in terms of being able to support others, or to be able to support yourself?
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, Daniela, in your opinion, what do we need in Mexico to achieve true social change?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think I think for Mexico, I think it's starting to talk to each other about what it is that you need. I think studying the situations. I know that there are have been like terrible situations around gender violence. I know there have been missing and murdered young people. I think the situation of the young teachers a few years ago. I think the idea of starting in where you are, if you are a teacher or if you are someone who works with young people, start talking to those people. Start asking them. Put out the cell film idea. Listen to each other. I think I can see that there's some very broad categories of disrupting gender norms, but I can say from working in many different contexts that nothing completely, you can't just take one thing and put it into another place. I think the methodologies are there, but the actual stories and the actual answers are in your community. So I would definitely, I think you could draw on these notions of gender transformation. I think you could draw on starting to work in communities and with small groups, but the answers will be there. I think it's also wonderful, though, to link up to other young people in other countries. And one of the things that I try to do in some of the work when it's possible through funding is to actually have the girls from South Africa and the girls in Indigenous girls in Canada meet. We've had several opportunities for girls from one side of Canada, which is a big country, but the situations are very different for in another part of the country. So that listening to each other, I think, is really vital. So I think in Mexico, I think it's very hopeful if you can think through starting small and starting in small communities and starting with the youth who are around you and the young women, girls and young women. What do they say? The boys and young men, what are they saying? Are there ways of bringing what they're saying together? I try to avoid putting people in situations where they're defending their position. Young women are defending their position with young men at the beginning. I think it's very important that people can really talk through these issues. And then, as you saw in that Girl Festo, decide, yeah, we would like some young men on this as well. So those kinds of things of like what works in your community, what are the norms in your community that would allow you to go forward? I hope that's a very doesn't do justice to your.
It's complicated,
question, but it's an amazing question.
Yeah, thank you so much. The next one, Brian. What has been the strongest or most powerful cell film you have seen?
Oh my goodness, that's a very hard question. Because the reason why it's a difficult question is that I feel like cell films, because they're made at a community level, are best viewed at a community level. So when I'm sitting in a community, first of all, it's usually not my community. I'm perhaps an outsider, but it's seeing the reactions of people to that cell film. So when I showed you no, that was such a powerful cell film because I saw that everyone in the room got it. When I showed you the cell film on early marriage, people, you're too young, I'm too young, she's too young. When that was screened, people went wild in the audience. They had watched 13 others. So it wasn't as though like, oh, their cell film is better than ours. The response of people was so palpable and so amazing. So so it's that kind of power around affect, and how do we see people responding to something? So I feel like there are certain I have certain cell films that might have sometimes there's music in them that is also very moving. I have certain drawings, a drawing that someone did in Rwanda of a baby in a toilet being dropped into the toilet by her mother, who's 12 years old. And that moved me. Like I can just think of that. And then I would know why I get up tomorrow morning and do more work in this area. So there's that kind of movement or that kind of affect. So I think in the cell films, it's very much about the audiences. The cell film that was made in South Africa that led to the Lost Cop Protocol. I mean, the idea that that those girls in this very rural area who had never made a cell film before made something that was so powerful that the adults said, we have to do something. And the legislator had to do something. So I kind of think of it as a context of, rather than just watching it once. I kind of like that idea of how to see it in context.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
The next one, Alberto, what motivated you to create this movement? Maybe some experience?
Oh, yes. Well, you know, I was a teacher of junior high students for a number of years in a rural fishing village in Nova Scotia, where we made films with Super 8 in the late 1970s. So I kind of brought the interest in filmmaking and cultural production along already. But I had occasion to lead a project in South Africa with educational leaders in the right after apartheid, from 1996 to 2001, with training principals and school governing bodies, and that was really at the exact moment when South Africa finally is liberated, and then AIDS comes along, and I was actually in a classroom with a group of grade 9 students, and we were looking at novels that would be about South African novels, and I wanted young people to really relate to these, and so I had brought in different novels that had things to do with sexual and reproductive health rights, and novel where somebody has AIDS it finds out that they're HIV positive, and suddenly one student said, "We're sick of AIDS." And they meant it two ways. They meant we are sick of AIDS, we are dying. There were young people were dying at alarming rates, and there were no ARVs in the late 1990s and early. So when people said they're sick of AIDS, they are sick of AIDS. But they were also saying we are sick of hearing of AIDS, the apathy. It's boring. We don't want to do this. We don't want to drive down the road between Johannesburg and Pretoria and see big signs about AIDS. And that's when I really the work around cultural production and filmmaking and doing something innovative and something different really came into my work. And that project that we started in 2002, we called the Soft Cover Project. And then we made a documentary called Fire and Hope. But it was very much about, the fire and hope comes from making and doing. And that really, from then on, I moved to South Africa at that point. I was teaching at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I had many occasions to work with teachers, community health workers. I could see they were so frustrated. They didn't know what to do. And so this idea of cultural production and making and listening and doing, and people laughing as they are crying because they're making things, they're doing things. And it's very enjoyable to be working together on this collective cause. And of course, that work on HIV and AIDS now has become more chronic than it was as a death sentence, but gender-based violence is still very huge, and so many other critical issues around poverty. So it was really those moments of seeing that I actually did know how to do something. I had done this work. At one point, I even thought I should just go into medicine. I should just leave education because it seemed like education was useless when people are dying, and what difference does it make whether you can read or not? And then suddenly realizing that you could actually take this work and address Sick of AIDS. I've written, I wrote an article called Sick of AIDS, I think in 2003 or 4. And in our new book, we certainly talk about this notion of Sick of AIDS as well, because it was such a driving piece.
Okay, thank you so much. The next one and the last one, Sandra, this is not a question. Thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell, for such a thoughtful conference. It makes us think a lot about what we do to improve in our country. Congratulations, on your great work. We are waiting for you in Mexico.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. I will be very honored to come to my new home at Albert Einstein University. It sounds lovely. And I wish you
Okay.
all the best in your work. And thank you again so much for inviting me to do this. It's been such a pleasure.
Okay, Dr. Mitchell, it has been an honor to listen to you and agree with you in many of your ideas. On behalf of the whole Albert Einstein University, I have to say thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. And thank you to Rami and Nessa and Leanne and Emily and other people who helped me put the PowerPoint presentation together. A cast of thousands. Thank you. Okay. Bye now.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And have a nice day.
Thank you. You too. Bye. Thank you, Dr. Guerra. Bye-bye. Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.